I was surprised how many people thought in my last video that I didn't have enough metal to make this pattern. This is the same size as that foam cannon. I'm going to put it in this bag because I don't want it to get sopping wet. I've got a drain on this bucket right here, so it's filled all the way up. And I'm going to put this in, and it's going to push out as much water as its volume. Plus a little bit extra if any air gets trapped in the bag. There we go. So it has now pushed out as much water as its volume. So now I just need to measure how much water it takes to get that back up to the fill mark. Going 1 liter at a time. So that was 2,300 milliliters. So let me do some quick math. Converting that into cubic inches, I get it's 0.3048 pounds per cubic inch, 42.8 pounds of metal that I need. That crucible I had can hold 51 pounds of brass. So yeah, the crucible did have enough volume. Now the problem is I'm going to do a horizontal pour. When I do a horizontal pour, I'm going to have a sprue, a pour spout, and vents, and those are going to use up metal. So I had to go get a bigger crucible. So here's the crucible I used last time. Here's the new crucible. This can hold 51 pounds, this can hold 66. Bigger crucible meant I needed bigger handling equipment. I had to make a different lifter because that lifter was too small for the big crucible. So I got a new lifter and I had to make a new ring for pouring. What I think I'm going to do is plan on melting about 60 pounds. Then once I skim off slag, I'll end up with 55, and that'll leave me an additional 10 pounds for pour spouts and vents and whatnot. Really? You think? Over 125 Fahrenheit. Severe burns. Oh gosh, I better be careful. I did get up into the fill spout. It might not have filled the whole thing. I'm in the vent too, you can see that, but I don't know if it filled all the way. Oh, I wish I had just melted 5 more pounds of metal. Darn it. I'm leaving this sitting out in the middle of the concrete, just in case it decides to burst into flames. So it's been sitting out here all day, and it's just getting to the point where it's not uncomfortable to touch. It's still quite warm, but I am going to refrain from opening it. I will leave it out here all night, and we'll open it in the morning. I'm concerned because looking down here, I don't see any shrinkage on the pour spout. Interestingly, on the vent, it looks like the whole cannon has shrunk. If it has to shrink, that's the way I would want it to do it. I would not want it to shrink in one area like that. But the more I think about this, the more I think that this is going to be another failure. So that's why you pour them vertically. Several people asked about that. If you have this thing vertical and you pour it, as it shrinks, it's going to pull not only from the top, it's going to pull from the center, which is the area you're going to drill out. It assures that your breech is going to be a good, solid piece of metal. Here, I may have a breech that was molten and then the top shrunk in. And that's exactly what I was talking about. That's why you don't pour it horizontal. Darn it. Wow, it's only 50 pounds, 49.9. I thought I had more metal in the Crucible than that. And while extra metal in the pour would have helped, I still would have had problems with it shrinking at the top of the breech here. So it is possible to pour this horizontally without the shrinking. And I'll show you how. This is how they would do it in a commercial operation. You got your cannon. There's the muzzle. So in order to get this to solidify without any voids, you need a big mass of metal beside it. Alright, let me do a better job of this. Alright, so there's your casting. Now what you would do is you would make an in-gate here, and then you would make a big chamber here, just like that. You would do a pour spout over here. So you would pour here and it would fill up this, which would then feed the cannon. So this will be the last thing that's molten, so that as this shrinks, it'll be able to pull from that. So this is what's called a gating system. So why am I not doing that? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. My Crucible is pretty much as full as it can get just to make this part. So I would need probably double the metal to have a decent sized riser here in order to feed the casting like this. If this isn't big, it's not going to stay molten and it won't serve any purpose. You know, if I made a smaller one that size, it's not going to do anything, so that's just a waste of time. If I pour this vertically, what's going to happen? I'm going to have molten metal. It's going to cool on the outside. The solidification layer is going to slowly rise and come from the outside in. And what's going to happen is the last part to cool is going to be up in here. Ideally, I would have extra on top, and this extra portion up here would then act as my riser. This would be the last molten area that the casting could pull from. This would be the area that solidifies last. And what happens there is it moves very rapidly at the end as it cools, and it gets lots of tension and stress in the metal. You just cut that part off. The other thing is the area in here that's going to have the most tension and stress is going to be right in the center where it cooled last, and we're going to drill that out. A lot of people said I should put a core in this. Well, and a core is when you put a cylinder of sand down the center where the barrel is going to be. Well, there's a couple problems with that. One, that is going to want to float. It's going to be very hard to keep it in there. It will also have to be placed perfectly, or I'm going to end up ruining the casting. It's much easier for me to put this on the lathe and drill it later, and I'll know that I get it in the right spot. The other thing is, at most I'm going to be making this a 1-inch bore. I may not even do that. It may be 3/4. My core would be 1/2 inch. That's just not that much metal. It's not going to save me that much. But if I put a 1/2 inch core of sand in there, assuming it doesn't break and cause issues in the casting around it, and then I dump a bunch of molten metal around it, it's going to float. It's going to want to push up out, so I'd have to anchor it down in there somehow while I'm pouring right beside it. It's also going to change the way this thing cools. It's just going to change the dynamics of the whole thing. If you pour it solid and then drill it out, you are drilling out the worst part of your casting, and you're left leaving the walls as strong as they can be. So that's the way to go. The other advantage here is I don't need vents. I just need a big enough hole up here that I'm not blocking the pour. You know, it's like you can pour water into a bucket. As long as you don't totally obstruct the opening, there's plenty of room for air to get out while you're pouring in. And I also have to think it's going to lend to some strength. The fact that it's cooling circumferentially, it's going to be cooling from the outside in, and that's the same way it's going to be stressed. Doing it this way, it's laying down layers. It's going linearly. It's not cooling in the way that it's going to be stressed. So it just makes sense to me that cooling it from the outside in is going to lend for a more uniform, stronger result. So, you know, one thing I could do, I could put this on the lathe and I could turn it down. I've only lost like 1/2 inch here, so the whole cannon would be smaller. I could just bring it down in its dimensions and just go ahead with it. So if any of you guys think I should do that, why don't you just go ahead and hit that unsubscribe button and go on. Have a nice day. No, my goal is to make the biggest cannon I possibly can. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I know I'm breaking some of the casting rules and then the best way to do metal casting. You know, when you're a hobbyist and you're not doing production work, you can do that. I'm going to pour this again. I'm going to do it vertically. Let's see how that goes. Was not a fan of the lost foam method. Some people did give me some really good suggestions. You take the foam and you coat it with some kind of plaster so that it's more rigid, and then you pour into that, and I think that would work. But that foam stunk, and then I'm mixing plaster in with my green sand, and you know, this worked really well. I don't have a bunch of sand embedded in the surface of this, so if I ram the mold well, it's going to work. The question is, when I'm pouring in the molten metal's falling, it's going to be more than 2 feet, and then hitting the sand at the bottom, the sand's just not going to be able to hold up to that. So I've got to find a solution to solve that problem, and I've got some ideas, but I'd like to hear what you guys think. Leave comments below, and we're going to go for round 3 on the next video. Thanks for watching. We're getting there.